Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Oh, that was pretty good. That was not bad at all. Can I just check before we get started, who was at my session at the ITSMF conference? Just 2 people. That's perfect, because there is a little bit of repetition, so apologies to Casper and Michael. But on the bright side, you will have an advantage when we come to the group exercises. So, you know. So my name's Claire Agata. Today we're going to talk about introducing SIAM. We've got some slide content that I'm going to run through. We've got some group exercises, so you've got a chance to kind of think about this within your own environment. And then at the end of the session, I'm just going to take kind of 10 minutes to introduce something brand new to you, which is something called Verism, which is a new service management approach that I've been working on. So I just want to share a little bit of information with you about that as well, just for your interest, hopefully. Hopefully, she says. I'm going to start this one backwards, I think, because I'd like to hear a little bit more about the people in the room. So if it's okay with you, if I can just ask you to introduce yourself, tell me where you work, and tell me what you're hoping to get from today. And if we can start on the table at the back, please.
Hi, my name is Lars Carl Hansen. I come from the central bank of Denmark, where we are embarking on a journey onto getting into the SIAM. But SIAM in a bit of different way, because we've got services not just externally, but also got them inside the business. So it's not just retained organization, but it's inside the business. So it's sort of a crisscross between the models. But I'm very interested in getting some new information.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yes, hello, I'm Morten from the Central Bank. I'm working in the group risk, so for me this is a way to learn something new about risk management.
Okay.
From the perspective of service management. I'm focusing on labor risk management, so this is why it's very interesting for me to learn more about this.
Thank you very much.
Hey, my name is Nera, and I'm working in KMD as a supply manager, together with 3 more of my colleagues. They're also here. And we're currently implementing SIAM in our governance, so we're here to get some inspiration.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yeah, I'm Jens Tornskov. I am working with Nera as well at KMD. As mentioned, we're working with SIAM implementing with different outsourcing partners.
And one more, my name is Jesper. I'm running the supply management team in KMD. We just started the journey of implementing SIAM together with some external consultants. So the aim is to mature SIAM within the next 12 months.
Wonderful, thank you.
Yeah, my name is Lisa Eriksson. I'm from a small consultancy company called Blue Hat. I've been very interested in SIAM for years. And have been helping different customers to figure out how to do this.
Brilliant, thank you.
My name is Justine, and I come from business technology consulting called Certificate. I'm primarily a project manager, so I don't work directly with SIAM. However, it's an interest area of mine, and I'd like to learn more about it.
Thank you.
And my name is Martin Sonnegaard, I come from Nordea, head of a newly established service integration team in Nordea.
Okay.
So I'm very interested to get some input as well.
Wonderful, thank you.
My name is Thomas Carl-Bøjlesen. I come from Mærsk, and I'm interested in this from the perspective of IT governance, IT management, how to fit into.
Brilliant, thank you.
We will need the microphone.
Yeah, for the webinar.
Of course.
You're all going to be famous.
I'm Crystal Techless. I'm a lawyer at Kroman, and primarily work with IT outsourcing contracts. And we see this theme arising more and more.
Yeah.
And basically just here to get some inspiration and understanding the sort of more management side.
That's wonderful, thank you.
Thank you. My name is Casper. I'm also a service management consultant and have been working with SIAM for a couple of years, primarily here to get to know people, learn maybe even more.
My name is Michael Imhoff. I'm from Suffocate, and as we heard, it's going to facilitate this network when or if it's established. Also the former chairman of SIAM Denmark. We just had a 2 days conference which they have referred to with the topic of service integration.
Hi, I'm Lars Christian Larsen. I'm from a consulting company called Business Now. I'm one of the proud 3 first Danish SIAM Structures, together with Lise, who was number 2.
I think I finished.
And we have someone who wants to mention it. Yes, no, sorry. Yes, SIAM obviously it's a very interesting area, and it's coming into focus more and more, because we need to be able to coordinate the delivery of service. So I think that's very complementary to the service management area at this point, and definitely in the future.
My name is Benjamin. I come from a company that specializes in actually implementing integration of IT. So we are here, of course, as an interest in learning more about the technique and see whether it fits in our business model.
Wonderful, thank you.
My name is Jesper Østergaard. I come from ITAM Org, IT Asset Management Membership Organization, international. We are the local chapter here as well. We do IT Asset Management Membership. We do training and certifications, conferences, etc. We do see as very tight integration or overlap between SIAM, ITAM, and IT Service Management. So, hence this is a very neat introduction for me. It's the first time I hear it in real life from yourself.
Perfect, thank you.
My name is Dave Agasser. Along with Claire, we run Scopism and ITSM Zone. I'm here for the coffee.
Yeah, and I'm Claudia. I'm from the Danish IT Society, responsible for the network department and the certification department. So it's very relevant for me to know what I'm doing actually.
My name is Stephanie, and I work with Nira and Jesper in KMD, supply management, and we're currently implementing SIAM.
That's perfect, thank you so much everyone, and that's a really nice mix of levels of experience, areas of interest, areas of specialism. So I think, you know, one of the points for today is to get you working with each other as well and kind of learning from each other. We can absolutely do that too. And for those of you that work together and you've maybe sat together when we do the group exercises, absolutely fine if you want to move tables, maybe talk to some different people. Sometimes you get a bit more benefit from that. So a little bit about me. I've been in service management most of my career. I kind of started in retail and then transitioned across to service desk, and then from there moved into a variety of service management jobs, done operational roles, done consultancy. Big part of my career has been built around ITIL, so yeah, somebody called me Mrs. ITIL the other day, which I don't know, maybe that's a good thing. For the last 10 years I've been running ITSM Zone, which is a training business. We were 10 years old this August. We specialise in e-learning for service managers, and about a year ago, no, it's nearly 2 years now, we created a new company, Scopism, and the real drive behind Scopism was the fact that it's becoming more complex now to be a service management professional. You know, when I started out, you got your ITIL certificate and maybe you did your ITIL managers, and that was all you needed for the rest of your career, whereas now you've got to be a DevOps expert, lean, agile, SIAM, this, that, everything. So Scopism was set up to kind of help service management professionals navigate the maze a little bit, and we've run one conference so far which was based around SIAM in the north of England. We've produced content and blogs, and for the majority of last year we were working on this project to create the SIAM Foundation Body of Knowledge, which is one of the things I'm going to talk a little bit about today. The SIAM Foundation Body of Knowledge, and also this increasing complexity in the service management world, led to me then being invited to come in and be the chief architect on Verism, which is also something I'm going to kind of share a little bit about at the end of the session. But the big thing for me is, you know, companies rely on IT so much now. What can we do as service management professionals to make that easier, better, to deliver more value, to make it work, to smooth the bumps in the road? That's absolutely what I want to do. And I would say hello to our webinar audience today as well. I don't know how many people are watching, but I know Sigma's watching in Norway, so hi Sigma. Okay, so everybody's heard of SIAM in this room, I'm assuming. You didn't drift in because of the smell of the pastries. So who is actually doing SIAM with some level of maturity at the moment? Okay, so a reasonable part of the room, and again, want to watch when you're doing the group exercises. They might be the people to go sit with. And those of you that are kind of planning to use SIAM. Perfect, thank you. So I'm going to start a little bit. Those colours have come a little bit strange, but you'll get the idea. I'm going to start a little bit with kind of the history of SIAM and where it's actually come from. So if we go back 30, 40, 50 years, most businesses were self-contained units. So each business had its own HR, its own finance, its own legal. As IT came in, it had its own IT department. And then at some point, some clever business whiz went, outsourcing, let's make that a thing. And businesses started to think, this isn't what I came into business to do. I didn't come into business to spend ages working on contracts or dealing with HR problems. Surely there's a specialist that I could pay to do this so that I can concentrate on my core business. And that's where this concept of outsourcing came from. And companies went, this is brilliant. You know, these guys are legal whizzes, or this company is an actual HR powerhouse. We can give them something to do. So outsourcing became a thing, but with that comes some complexity and comes a level of challenge for organisations as well. So there's a lot of benefits that we can get from outsourcing, but there's also potentially a lot of problems that come with it. And before you get settled in too much and before I'm talking too much, this is where I want you to start kind of thinking. So we've got a reasonable number of groups in the room. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have you working on your tables, but I don't know if maybe somebody from that table at the back wants to just jump across onto this table here, so the numbers, and we're fine. What I want to do is 2 tables at the back. I want you to kind of have a think about the benefits of outsourcing. So why do companies outsource? Why do they use external suppliers to deliver services? And just come up with kind of as many reasons as you can. And for you companies, tables at the front, you've been promoted. You tables at the front, I'd like you to think about this question here. So you get one supplier, and then you introduce lots more. So maybe you've got 3, 5, 10 suppliers. What sort of problems are going to start to come into that environment when one customer organisation is working with lots of service providers? So I'm going to give you 5-ish minutes to kind of think about those, and then I'll ask you to present back to me and we'll get them up on the flip chart, and also a bit of competition. We'll see who can come up with the most. So 2 tables at the back, who's got the most? 2 tables at the front. Off you go. So just for those of you watching on the webinar as well, if you want to play along at home, by all means please do. Make some notes, jot some thoughts down, and then we'll compare and see how that goes. So tables at the back, you were doing benefits of outsourcing? Yes. Yep. So this table here, how many did you get?
12.
12. This table here?
35.
That's perfect. All right, what we'll do then is we'll start with this table here, and then if you've got anything extra to add, which assuming you will have, we can do that. So give me your top benefits of outsourcing. Possibly not Claudia. I think Claudia's just eating a pastry.
Well, something about overview of everything. Yeah, you buy from. Oh, I have to get the.
Yep, microphone.
Yeah. Get an overview and.
How do you get a better overview?
Yeah, well, depends on your, if you're buying from vendors and stuff, you get a better overview of all the different specializations. So you buy someone that is good at creating whatever you need.
So you get access to kind of specialist skills.
You get everything yourself.
And you don't have to do it yourself, which is so you can potentially save some time, some effort there. Yep.
Hopefully more cost effective.
Could be more cost effective. I was sat next to Daniel Breston at the ITSMF conference this week, and somebody mentioned something about reduced costs. And Daniel muttered and he went, that should be an outcome, not a goal. And I thought, do you know, that's very true. But there is the potential for it to be more cost effective.
Can we call it profit maximization?
Go on, explain that one to me.
Well, we're not allowed to call it cost effective.
I think there is a sense that we're putting resources in the best possible place, so sometimes it's less efficient to try and do it ourselves. So again, if we're paying for a specialist, if we think about something very traditional service management like capacity management, if we're paying a specialist, they'll have access to all sorts of tools that we don't necessarily have and couldn't necessarily afford as well. So I think that's fair.
Yeah. Well, it connects all the partners working together.
Oh, partners working together, hopefully, which is what we're going to be talking about. I like that word partners as well.
Yeah, integration.
Yep.
Quality assurance, better solutions.
Yes. Can we put that under access to specialists, do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it still counts for free then.
I should mention there are no prizes. I know.
Free piloting.
Can I ask, what do you mean about integration?
Sorry?
Can I ask, what do you mean about integration? Why outsource? Because of integration? Explain a little bit.
If you're able to integrate the different partners into one solution that you're selling, then that's what this whole SIAM is all about.
Yep, I think that's fair.
Well, then it says time zone. It could be positive, you know.
So maybe
if someone, you know, if you work at your day hours and what you need to get done is the opposite. Yeah.
So
follow
the SIAM principle.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's fair.
And agility.
And what, sorry?
Agility.
Because
you work with so many partners and stuff. So.
Yes. There is this idea that if you want to do something bold, it can be more simple. And the example that's always given there is the fact that Amazon Web Services has made it so much simpler now for startups to test a software idea because they don't have to invest in hardware, they don't have to equip a whole data center. Okay, we'll jump across this table here, take a couple from you.
Well, we have maybe some of it is the same, but we have, as you said yourself, you are able to focus on the core business.
Yep.
And this is why maybe something as the same as business overview, but you can improve the business model understanding because of that also.
Improve your business model. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Then it's of course also this with the scalability. You can scale your services and users.
I think I'll put that with agility because there is this idea that we can add and remove suppliers as we need to if we're outsourcing. So I think that's fair.
And also access to technology. You have specialists, but technology in itself.
Yep. Okay, and we'll take one more from you.
And it's, well, we had something about the execution of changes, but that could also be agility. But I don't know if anyone else has.
We have the opportunity to be more customer focused.
Go on.
Since you outsource and you don't have to focus on what you outsource, and you can be more customer focused.
Yeah, I like that. I think it's similar to focusing on your car business, but customer focus is always a good one.
Can I just say something? We need to remember the microphone.
Yeah, that's true.
Oh,
we
sorry.
have one more that you are forced to clean up in your own process to be able to outsource, so that's a value in itself.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of the way to word that. There is that saying, if you outsource problems, you've just got outsourced problems.
Yeah, exactly. So you need to do some housekeeping before you outsource, so we can promote that.
Okay. And we do have the ability for people at home to add things. We've got the speakers here. So if there's anybody who's watching on the webinar that wants to add anything to that list, if you raise your hand now. Anything, Fabian?
No hands.
Ah, come on, play along at home. Okay, that is fantastic. Thank you very much. So then, those are all the benefits of doing this, but then tables at the front, we asked you to kind of think about what sort of problems might then creep in as we start to work with multiple suppliers. When you're facilitating sessions like this, it's the most exciting time in your life when you get given a new pack of pens. That was, yeah. Thank you, Claudia. Okay, how many did you get?
10 good ones.
How many did you get?
It's not the point.
Give us some of your good ones.
Okay, we have a gap between agreements on state of agreements with the different suppliers.
Yep. So gaps, misalignment. I will apologise for my handwriting as well. It's horrific, but.
Securing end-to-end deliveries.
Say that again, sorry.
Securing end-to-end deliveries.
Explain that one to me.
It can be difficult to secure end-to-end deliveries when you have a complex setup with many vendors included in the value chain.
Ties into the scope gaps.
Yep. So impact on internal delivery.
No, it was end-to-end. End-to-end delivery.
End-to-end.
Oh, end-to-end, sorry.
How to secure the end-to-end delivery.
Yes.
We have a lot of them.
Yes, sorry. I was focusing on the same thing, but yeah, the service that you're actually doing, how you mesh all of this together. Yep.
Different perception of definitions and what needs to be delivered.
Yes. So no common language and no common understanding.
Yeah. Unclear roles and responsibilities.
Yep. This table's looking nervous now.
Yeah, because they are not going to have anyone work on done. As I said, we had 10 good ones, so we don't need the rest. Okay. Then defining the capabilities and the size of the retained organization can be a problem.
Yep. There's some fancy SIAM words coming out here. I think you've been reading in advance, haven't you? Yeah, so what do we need to keep within the organisation? What skills do we need? What capabilities do we need? Steve Morgan from Syniad IT, who's a real SIAM specialist, gave a really good presentation yesterday, and he was talking about the fact that there's a lot of organisations get very, very nervous about letting go, and they end up kind of keeping more than they actually need to, which then defeats the purpose of doing this in the first place. Yep, we'll take one more from you, well then we'll jump over here.
Conflict of interest between the suppliers.
Yeah. Okay, if you want to pass the microphone over. And we'll take a couple from you.
Yeah, we'll take the few that you missed. But really, exciting work that you've been doing over there.
Obviously, with the man.
No, but one of the things that we discussed were the existing contracts.
Yeah.
That you have that could be rigid or not really fit for purpose when we're looking at the multi-source environment.
Yep.
Then we have something about the value chain. Kind of value chain mismatch, because it's like the end-to-end situation, that what are you actually trying to achieve?
Yep.
And do you get that from the different sourcing environment?
Yep. And it's brilliant to have someone from the legal area here, because it's, you know, if you get that wrong at the beginning, everything becomes much harder. And there's a lot of organisations, again, treat SIAM like a fairly standard procurement, when in fact the contracts need to be specialised and need to be different. Okay, we'll take one more.
Yeah, we had a discussion about the horizontal supplier management.
Okay.
That you're maybe getting the same from different suppliers.
So
we're kind of paying too much for
yeah, some duplication.
Duplication,
yeah.
yes, overlapping services, yes.
It also has to do with the word we're not allowed to say, towers. So are you sourcing in towers, or are you sourcing horizontal? If you're sourcing horizontal, then you have layers which needs to work together.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I think there's again, when we draw these pictures and we draw these initial models, it looks very simplistic. It looks so neat and tidy. You know, here's the network tower and here's the application tower, when in fact what most organizations have got is this horrendously complicated spider web, and you know, some of your service providers are working together, and again, it's something that you've really got to be clear that you understand before you embark on this.
Yeah, maybe if one thing that we may want to add is about the trust and control situation that you have. Kind of being friends with your foes.
Yeah.
I think that's very.
Yeah. Okay, and for those of you watching on the webinar, does anybody want to raise their hand and add anything there?
Actually, they haven't raised their hands, but we have got a few comments.
Okay.
So we have Larry,
Mm-hmm.
I hope I pronounced it correct, from Finland.
Yeah.
And he says that, just one second, I'm going to announce the window here. We have been outsourcing for 10 plus years, and the challenges have arisen since then. Some have done their homework and get it working. I would say that the majority has now done multi-sourcing, but still has challenges that are unsolved.
Mm-hmm.
There are so easy way answers, but/and here in Finland, SIAM Foundation with structured approach is welcomed. Third day course as middle implementation review is welcomed and found useful. I don't know, it sounds like he has some experience, or I don't know if you've met him.
No.
No. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, that's Lai Piltoni from Vakaro Oil in Finland. Yes.
Perfect.
They're doing SIAM.
Yeah, thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
It's
We have a last comment from Lena, who says that, 1 second. It was in regards to contracts, and she writes, legal, not only within any contract, but also in regards to legislation, war, rule, etc.,
Yeah.
etc.
Yeah, absolutely. The legal, the contractual side of it is a real specialist area. Thank you so much.
Yeah, but raise your hands if you have any comments. It would be so nice to hear voices out there.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you for your contribution anyway.
Yeah, thank you everyone. Thank you Fabian as well. It's I don't know, it's like every now and then you have a hangout with someone in New Zealand and it doesn't cost anything because you're doing it over the internet, and something like this, every now and then I think we kind of forget just how amazing technology is and how it's transformed what we do, but that's an aside. Okay, so as most of you have picked up, when we looked at the problems with outsourcing, there is this kind of, yes, we have access to all these benefits, yes, it's wonderful, but as a customer organisation, we're not always that well equipped to manage these suppliers and these service providers. Maybe we get the contract wrong, maybe we get the scope wrong, and then we've got to manage them on an ongoing basis as well. So we have, you know, monthly supplier reviews, we get all these reports we've got to deal with. If we're looking at this with our lean heads on, there's a bit of waste that's creeping in. There's a lot that the customer organisation has to do that also maybe isn't the most efficient way to operate. So SIAM introduces this concept of a service integrator, which seems astonishingly simple. It's not. There's a lot of work that comes with that. But, you know, we talked about the end-to-end perspective, and it's basically saying, as the customer organisation, we wanted this simplicity, we wanted access to these specialist resources, but we want that as an end-to-end service. You know, we don't want to be managing this situation where something's broken and all of our suppliers are pointing fingers at each other and saying, well, it's not the network, it must be the application, and the applications team is saying, no, it must be the database. The service integrator is that kind of consolidating layer from the customer's perspective. But we've got benefits here from the service provider perspective as well, because the service providers have an agent on their behalf as well who can kind of reflect their perspective back to the customer, because there are still a lot of organisations that outsource and they treat the service providers as someone to kick when things go wrong. So within a SIAM model, what we want to have is a much more collaborative culture. Everyone works together. The service integrator is helping the service providers, they're looking at the big picture, they're providing this kind of end-to-end assurance across the whole network. So there's some examples here on this diagram. I'm assuming these slides will be available afterwards. Yep. So some examples here on this diagram of the kind of responsibilities within each layer of that model. So the service providers are freed up to focus on their own delivery, but also hopefully to work together a little bit more, find opportunities for innovation, for improvement. The service integrator is providing that end-to-end coordination, and we're going to look after the break at some examples of how we can structure the service integrator and some of the advantages and disadvantages there. And the key thing is that the customer organisation still has that strategic role. You know, we talked about if you outsource problems, you get outsourced problems. The customer organisation still needs to be very active, setting direction, attending governance boards, making sure that what they want is very, very clear. You know, it's quite tempting always to be looking from the customer's perspective, but you know, Dave and I have worked as service providers, we've worked in an outsourced model, and one of the problems that we had was the customer wasn't clear about what they wanted. So it was very, very difficult then for us to deliver that. So there is still that role for the customer. Everybody's got a role to play within this SIAM model. So that's your definition of SIAM, a management methodology applied in an environment that includes services sourced from multiple providers. And again, I'll kind of say this because quite a lot of people often ask, you know, isn't this just supplier management? I've got my ITIL book and it's got I don't know, 3 pages, 4 pages on supplier management. Isn't that enough? And there's nothing in SIAM that kind of contradicts supplier management principles, but this is a specific evolution of supplier management. So there's a lot of organisations around the world looking at SIAM, developing approaches, models for SIAM, and all SIAM does is kind of distill all of their learning and all of their experience. So SIAM is kind of a specific type of supplier management, and the kind of the key thing is that it's built on people's experience. It's kind of grown up from all of these companies, and it gives us a solution for these complex supply networks that all of us have now. You know, my trading business is, we're a very small company really in the scheme of things, but everything's outsourced, you know, hosting, web development, all the applications that we use, the custom development that then sits on top of that application, course production. Our supply network is immense, and then if you scale that up to the size of some of the organisations we've got in this room, you can be talking hundreds of different suppliers. So why should we care? And I think this comes back to the fact that we want all these benefits that we expected when we first outsourced. We want value for money. We want what we paid for. We want scalability. We want to spend less time looking at reports and in supplier performance meetings. But a couple of the groups kind of mentioned it as well. Wouldn't it be lovely if our suppliers started working together and innovating together? So can we move from this culture of finger pointing and blame to a way of allowing all of our suppliers to speak, to share, to put those collaborative mechanisms in place so that they can actually suggest ways to improve things? And there's this wonderful expression, competitive tension. We had a little example of that with these tables, you know. I give you something to do, I say, whoever does best wins. We can do that with our service providers as well. We can encourage them to do more than what's in the contract. And that's not to say we're abusing them, we're taking advantage, but we can encourage them to kind of think outside these targets that we give them and look at how we can actually do things better. And I'll just run through this and then we'll have a quick break. So some of the key elements to think about when you're looking at SIAM. Contracts is a massive thing. You know, we talk a lot within SIAM about culture, collaboration, working together. That's all really, really lovely, but it's nice to have a contract underneath it as well. Maybe one that says, and you will turn up to the collaboration meetings, and you're not going to send someone else. You will send the head of service delivery. So the contracts are key, and it's this move away from the kind of the monolithic outsourcing to shorter durations, to contracts that enforce collaboration. And if we can get those right, that's really going to help us. But I think one of the groups mentioned the fact that quite often we're working with existing contracts. So sometimes we have to kind of evaluate what we've got in place, look at the service providers we've got. Do we want to keep them? And if so, we might have to make some changes to contracts, or we might even have to wait for contracts to expire. Culture's a huge thing. People have got to work together. People have got to make friends. And if you're kind of bringing in a SIAM model, you need to look at kind of specific ways to encourage people to work together. In the UK, that tends to be just go to the pub, but there's probably other ways to do it which are better. But you know, you've got to look at the structure of the meetings you put in place. You've got to look at how you socialise. If you're not co-located, you've got to work out how to do this with virtual teams, which introduces an extra layer of challenge. But culture's absolutely a key part of it. And again, coming back to procurement, you need to think about selecting suppliers who are going to be a good cultural fit. Were you going to ask a question there?
I think it's an interesting one with the culture.
Generally, it's an interesting aspect of the culture, but there might be a sort of basic conflict of interests here. So it tends to go beyond sort of culture and being good friends, drinking beers. There's a commercial side of it as well.
Yeah, absolutely, because you'll have people, quite often, you'll have service providers who are competing in one market, and then you're asking them to sit down and play nicely together. So you need to kind of think about that and how you build the safe spaces, how you protect their intellectual property, you know, how you protect their interests and their reputation. But certainly something that we're seeing in the UK market is more and more of the service providers are recognising that they have to get good at this. If they're not good at this, they're not going to win the contracts, they're not going to win the bids, because the customer organisations aren't going to want to work with somebody who is just interested in protecting their little piece. Question here.
My question is kind of a mix of both contracts and culture, and maybe some of the others as well, because to think about the suppliers as a stationary organization with the only focus of delivering what's in the contract, I think it's a bit optimistic, because what you see is that whether you are a customer organization or client, supplier organization, you want to expand your business. You can do that two ways. You can either get more customers, or you can expand horizontally and have more supplementing products or service deliveries or whatever. So, and eventually you will have your suppliers actually fighting about the same customers, the same market, because they have expanded horizontally and now overlapping each other. So how would you deal with that situation? Because I'm pretty sure that a Microsoft database delivery wouldn't settle down and talk nicely with Oracle or something like that, just to give an example.
Yeah, and that again is something that you absolutely have to consider within your SIAM model. And there's two parts of it there. One of which is the fact that you've mentioned companies like Microsoft, and I mentioned Amazon Web Services earlier on. Microsoft, Amazon Web Services are not necessarily going to engage that regularly. You know, if you've got an integrated change management board, Microsoft aren't popping round to tell you about the changes they've got planned for Azure this week. So one of the things that we need to think about with SIAM models now is, how do we manage these suppliers that have a fairly restricted set of standard offerings but still have the potential to have a huge impact on our services? So we need to find different ways to engage with them. Sometimes it's a case of being more proactive and finding, well, where do we get that information about the change schedule that's coming from Microsoft? So that's one part of it. And in terms of the fact that you've got these service providers who are competing, but you're also asking them to talk to each other, again, a lot of it comes back to the contract and the culture, because it's got to be in their interest to engage. So as a service provider, the last thing you want is insecurity. If you are insecure in this contract, in this role that you're in, you're not going to want to invest, you're not going to want to engage. But within a SIAM model, we can give them security, we can show them the strategy, show them the roadmap, show them where their place is in that roadmap, and that can encourage them then to kind of innovate and want to be part of it. And again, you might find that some of them don't want to be part of it, and that's when you'll think maybe we've got a bit of a cultural mismatch here. Governance, absolutely key as well. Looking at roles and responsibilities we talked about, making sure we're very clear who's doing what, who's keeping an eye on what's doing what, what's the customer doing, what's the service integrator doing, and roles and responsibilities you mentioned. Tooling, we could do a whole day session on tooling, but again, it's thinking about what data do your service providers need in order to do their job, what reports do you need, metrics. Somebody mentioned kind of misaligned priorities and understanding. How do you get around the fact that what is a severity 3 to you is a priority 1 to somebody else? So thinking about common data dictionaries across your organisation as well. And I think I've mentioned Steve from Syniad IT. on the SINIAD IT website, Steve's got some white papers, and one of them is about your tooling strategy for SIAM. So it'd be worth going and have a look and downloading that. We can maybe put a link up at the end. Yes.
I just wanted to add on that. I just came home yesterday from an excellent open group arrangement in Amsterdam where we had the IT for IT forum discussion.
Yeah.
And actually SIAM was up there quite often, because what we're actually doing with the IT for IT function structure is trying to build up the automation and the communication between tools within a multi-vendor environment, because that's actually the whole purpose for that. So in my view, I think that that within the service management community we're kind of maturing as well, because we now have a toolbox of things that we can combine to make sure that what we want to achieve is actually something that we can do. So I think within the SIAM environment, the automation and tooling shouldn't be something that you would look at internally within SIAM, but should be something where we should look at, for instance, IT for IT or other areas where you can complement that, and where maybe the idea has already been thought of and actually also described.
Yeah, and I think, again, this is something that the tool vendors are responding to, you know, that they're understanding. So there's lots of tool vendors that have SIAM solutions, so I'm not endorsing anyone particularly, but there's a company called ITRP they've done an awful lot of work in the SIAM space and looking at a license model that includes or is able to include multiple service providers. So there's a lot happening there, but one of the things, we've just been working on the SIAM professional material and kind of working with a lot of really experienced SIAM professionals, and one of the things that they were saying is this is iterative, and quite often what they find is at the start of a SIAM engagement, it's really manual. You know, you're taking data from one system and keying it into another system, but as the model matures, you then have the opportunity to identify where you want to automate. And that, I think, is a good opportunity for us to take a 10-minute break.
I think a little to start.
Yeah? Okay. So, who's downloaded the SIAM Foundation Body of Knowledge? Pretty decent. I'm not going to spend hours and hours on this then, but I'll just share a little bit of information about how we pulled it together. So, mentioned kind of earlier on that it's a bit terrifying being a service management professional at the moment. There is something new comes out every week, and this year I've been responsible for quite a lot of that, so apologies. But I do think as service management professionals, we have to kind of keep on top of what's happening. And, you know, every time you get an email saying there's a new book, there's a new this, there's a new that, sometimes it does feel a bit kind of, oh, what now? But for me, things like this session, blogs, conferences, networking events, learn a little bit about everything that's happening in your environment, because some of it is going to be useful. So these are the companies that collaborated to kind of kick off the SIAM Foundation project. So Scopism, which is the company that I work with, Exin, the Dutch exam company, and the British Computer Society and Dansk IT, you're involved in this as well through your relationship with Exin. But really where this all kicked off was the fact that everybody I knew seemed to be talking about SIAM, but there wasn't really any information available because it was quite often being pioneered by the big service provider companies. It's not really in their interest to kind of share any detail about models or concepts. People were using different words to mean different things, all very classic SIAM problems. So Scopism, Exin and BCS signed a partnership and said, let's try and create a single version of the truth for SIAM. You know, let's try and make some training available, some content available, so that the people who are actually doing this have something to work with. And these are some of the companies that were then involved in the volunteer group. So we had, I think, 22 people work together on the SIAM Foundation Body of Knowledge. So some of the big companies here you might recognise: Atos, Tata, Sopra Steria, you know, these are the big service providers. But then Syniad IT, this is Steve Morgan's company, ISG, they're specialist SIAM consultancies, Kinetic IT based in Australia, ITSM Value based in the UK. But basically what we were trying to do was find the people who were doing SIAM. You know, we had one lady from Atos who's done more than 40 SIAM engagements in her career. So find these people who were doing it and just see if we could kind of pull something together to help people. So this is some of the group. Because we were a global team, we mostly worked through conference calls, but we did have one face-to-face meeting in London. So we, as you'll all know, if you get given something to discuss and debate, the debate can go on all day. So we used voting cards. We had green and red cards for a lot of the voting that we did. But we've got there Steve Morgan, Anna Leylands from Sopra Steria, Kevin Holland did a lot with SIAM at the UK National Health Service. So UK government have been a big kind of proponent of SIAM, and Rajiv there, who's an independent contractor in the SIAM space, but I think he's working at BAE at the moment. So just a couple of the things that we kind of debated in the group. Michael mentioned towers earlier on, and towers it's a very common expression in the SIAM world to talk about having your suppliers in these neat towers. So we've got the network tower, we've got the application support and development tower. We had a debate within the group, did we like the word tower or not? Did we think it was the right word? And what we actually decided was no, because tower doesn't reflect these complex supply networks we have. Tower feels very monolithic, feels a bit like a silo. You know, you build a tower when you want to protect something.
So you chose to call it stovepipe instead.
Yeah, we did. So the word that we picked was service provider, because service providers can be external, they can be internal teams that are behaving like a supplier for you. So service provider is kind of the standardized term that you'll find in the foundation body of knowledge. We're not arrogant about this, you know, so many people still use the word tower. People from the foundation group, some of them still use the word tower. It's not kind of trying to be the language police. It was just trying to look at this and say, is this the most appropriate terminology? So it does seem like the SIAM world in general is kind of moving away from towers. And the other thing that you hear quite frequently service delivery. It's that creative cutlery that I ordered is here. The other thing that you hear quite frequently is people talking about the SIAM, and what they're referring to is that service integrator layer of that model that we looked at. And there were some people in the group who felt extremely strongly that if we talk about the SIAM, what we've done then is created a silo. Because if you make the SIAM, then the SIAM has to do all the service integrating. So we say in the foundation body of knowledge, you know, everybody's got a role to play within a SIAM model. The service integrator, that's what we talk about, but the customer has a SIAM role. The service providers have a SIAM role. When I do these at home, I'm always waiting for the doorbell to ring. Okay, ready to do a little bit more thinking, a bit more work? Tough. Okay, one of the things that I said I'd mention was SIAM structures. So that service integrator layer, you can source that in a number of different ways, and that's what becomes a SIAM structure. So working with the group, we identified that there are 4 common SIAM structures. So the first one you'll see there is an external service integrator. So that one top left as you're looking at it. So with an external service integrator, you go to a company, you know, Atos, Sopra Steria, Tata, however it might be, and say, please will you be the service integrator for me and manage these service providers. The other option, which is kind of the polar opposite of that, is an internal service integrator. So the customer organisation says, I am going to act as the service integrator myself. We are going to provide the resources for service integration. You've then got what's called a hybrid. So a hybrid service integrator is where you've got some staff from the customer and some external staff, and they work together to be the service integrator. And then we've got what's called lead supplier as service integrator. So you take one of your service providers and they also act as the service integrator, or alternatively sometimes it's the case that you've got an external service integrator but then they successfully bid to act as a service provider as well. So those are the 4 structures that we have for SIAM. And as we wonderfully have 4 groups, what I'm going to ask you to do is think about, let's go with 2 advantages and 2 disadvantages. So this group at the back here, you can take the external service integrator, and I think we will pinch someone from this table here to join you, because I don't think Dave was joining in last time. No. So if one person from this table can move over. So you're doing the external service integrator. You guys can do the internal service integrator. Hybrid here, lead supplier as service integrator here. So 2 advantages, 2 disadvantages, and we'll try and do this in 5 minutes. People at home, make your notes as well, think about this. I'll ask at the end if you've got anything that you want to add. We do have the speakers, so it'd be really, really great to hear from you as well if you don't want to write in the comment box. So which type of service integrator were you looking at?
So we were discussing the internal service provider.
Okay. And some advantages of that approach?
The advantages are that as an internal service integrator, you know the systems and the culture and the customers, so knowledge is a benefit.
Yep. And another benefit?
And another benefit, you could say, in control, that since you are internal and you have all the connections, or so to speak, then you are in control of a lot of different issues.
And some potential disadvantages of that?
Yes, that is, since you are internal, you might need some cultural changes to be perceived as an integrator.
Yep.
And you also need to put your tools and processes free of the traditional way of doing things and become a truly integrator.
Yes.
So that's also a change you need.
Yeah.
And since it's called a challenge, because it's challenging to do, we perceive the internal service integrator as one that's growing out of the existing organization.
Yes. So
so you can say
separation
of tools and processes. Yeah.
Yep. Some good ones there. So the advantage of doing this is, you know, the learning curve is much shorter because you already know the people, you already know the systems. You also have the contract.
This is what happens when you outsource.
That's quite all right. But the disadvantages are it does require a culture change, and there is also that kind of separating the role, because if the service providers just see you as a customer organisation, they don't engage with you as an integrator. Okay, if you want to pass the mic over to this table.
Yes, we were talking about the internal. Oh, sorry. What's that? External. Sorry,
External.
the external. Yeah, the external service integrator, and one of the advantages of hiring an external service integrator was that you're able to get best-in-class service integrator, because there are professionals doing exactly that. And we're also discussing that hiring an external could bring, would mean that you're free of legacy constrictions.
Nice.
You're able to look at things with a fresh mind.
Yep.
On the contrary, when we're talking about the cons, one of the difficulties with having an external service integrator would be that there could be a lack of business insight.
Yep.
And it would also be difficult for an external service integrator if the delivery model was a bit more complex, where you had deliveries also coming from the business side, so operating, say, within the customer organization would be an issue.
Yeah, so engaging with kind of internal service providers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one kind of note of caution. Yes, excuse me, I can't write and talk at the same time. I know. Whatever comes out of my mouth comes out of the pen as well. One kind of note of caution is that SIAM is getting really fashionable, and in the work that I've been doing, I've come across at least one company that's selling SIAM services with nothing behind it. The selling service integration services, they've never done it. All they've got is kind of a couple of white papers that they've written. So if you are engaging as an external service integrator, I'm sure you would, but you know, check the references really carefully, check the integrity of the people that you're working with. I've been quite busy this year, to be honest. I've not been doing much external service integration. Okay, people watching the webinar, anything to add to that? We would love you to say something. We want to hear the voice from the speakers. Have we got anyone, Fabian?
No one raising their hand.
Okey-doke. So this team at the front here? Yeah. Do you want to grab the mic?
It's me again. It's me again, okay. We had the hybrid model, or the hybrid service integrator setup. And one of the pros of that is that you slowly build your internal capabilities.
Yep. You have a bit of time while you've got some support. Yep.
Yeah. And then it's more agile than the internal, that you can scale up and scale down the size of the service integrator role.
Yep.
So those were the pros. The cons, it requires a higher maturity level than a pure external or lead supplier.
Yep.
It's because, yeah, you're kind of stuck with the people and the processes that you have internally.
Yep.
And it's hard to define roles and responsibilities, and within service integration, who does what, where it will split between the internal and the external people.
Yeah, it's
and not just pushing it over to the externals and then not building the internal capabilities.
Yeah, it can be a real challenge, this one, making sure that stuff isn't duplicated and stuff isn't missed. So yeah, you're absolutely right
You
there.
actually do it as the build and transfer.
Yes. Yeah. Listen, with the hybrid, when we were writing the foundation body of knowledge, we said hybrid is quite often a transitional arrangement because you bring in the external resources while you're building your skill set, and then you potentially move to an internal service integrator. And somebody emailed me a few weeks ago and said, could it not be transitional the other way, in that you have a hybrid and then you decide, actually, as a customer, I don't want to do this anymore, and you move to an external? And yeah, that's absolutely fair, and I think we'll make an amendment there when we release the next version of the body of knowledge. Okay, if you want to pass the microphone over.
No, to our reference person. Thank you. Advantages?
Yep, so this is lead supplier.
Lead supplier. One advantage is there's hopefully there's a good existing relation that you can exploit or use. And another one is that hopefully this existing relation has got existing capabilities as a service integrator, which you can use.
Yep.
So those were the advantages, and disadvantages we emphasized was, one is what Lars, one of our very clever SIAM consultants in this country, chose to name gatekeeper misuse. So that means if everything goes into this particular service provider, then he gets to decide whether he wants to do it himself or whether he should ask somebody else to do it.
Do you know, I'm always amazed and kind of in awe when I come to another country and you're doing business in English, like as a second language, and then you rock out things like gatekeeper misuse as well, which, you know.
Well, he is quite something. And the other one, the other one is what's called segregation of duties, or it's also Steve Morgan mentioned yesterday as Chinese walls.
Yeah.
So are we able to, as a service integrator and a service provider, are we able to distinguish between when do we do what?
Yes.
Do we invoice our customer twice for the same services, etc.?
Yeah, yeah, that's absolutely right. This one can be particularly challenging because so much of the service integrator role is about relationships and working with the service providers. So if any of the service providers perceive that there's an unfair advantage, then there's a real challenge there. So this works nicely when you've got the really big companies who can have completely separate teams working on this. Anything to add from the people on the webinar? No. Oh, you're not keeping Fabian busy enough. Oops. Okay, so just to kind of sum up the foundation body of knowledge things, most of you will know now that the foundation body of knowledge is a free download from scopism.com. It's come from the SIAM community and we want to make it as available as possible. And we've also got some process guides as a free download as well. So you will find most SIAM models are built on fairly traditional service management processes, but there are some kind of SIAM considerations. So, you know, change management looks very similar to change management as we all recognize it, but what do you need to think about in order to manage change across this multi-sourced estate? The SIAM Foundation training exams have been available since March this year. Real strong global response. When we first started this project, quite a lot of people said, SIAM's just a UK thing really. Certainly America's not interested, but what we found with the downloads of the body of knowledge, we can see the countries of the people coming to the website. America's got a huge interest in this, and the response from Europe's been really strong as well.
Do you have any numbers? How many people have taken the exam?
I don't. I can tell you there's more than 3,000 people downloaded the body of knowledge now. And the last exam figures I heard were in the hundreds, but I haven't had anything up to date recently. I don't know if you've got those figures, Claudia. No. And there's also the body of knowledge is a free download, but it's available as a book as well. So if you want to buy a physical thing that you can scribble all over and put post-it notes in, then it's available via the publishers Van Haren. And the training syllabus in the course was also reviewed by ITSMF UK, and they gave it kind of a stamp of approval to say this stuff makes sense, which is that's nice to have. And we got a bit of an award as well, which is really exciting. The ITSMF UK Professional Service Management Awards, we entered the group who'd worked on the body of knowledge to the thought leadership category, and we won that. So that was really nice because the people in the group volunteered their time and they spent an awful lot of time on it and they created something amazing. So it's really lovely that they got some recognition there.
Who's the picker on the right?
Yeah, religious guidance.
So what's the song?
Yeah, so he was the guy on the right is Reverend Richard Coles, and he was in the 1980s pop group the Communards with Jimmy Somerville. He subsequently, after a lifetime of abuse, found God and is living life as an openly gay vicar in the south of England. He's also an amazing after-dinner speaker. So whilst he looks like he's part of the SIAM group, he is just the after-dinner speaker who was presenting the award that night.
Yeah.
The distance between SIAM and SIAM.
So yeah, bit of a brush with fame as well. Yeah. That's John McDermott from HP. So HP had sponsored the awards. That's Steve Morgan that we've mentioned. Michelle had come over from Australia, from Kinetic. That's me, obviously. Kevin, Duncan Watkins, who's at, I want to say Gartner now, but it could be Forrester, so whichever one's wrong, I'm sorry. And that's Simon who'd come over from Australia as well. We've moved on from Foundation now, and we're developing the content for SIAM Professional. So SIAM Professional, again, is going to be a free download, and we're hoping that's going to be available by the ITSMF UK conference, which is at the end of November. So the team's been working on that this year. With the foundation material, it's all very kind of black and white, definitions, structures, challenges. With Professional, what we've tried to do is kind of take a step up and look at the decisions you need to make within a SIAM environment and some kind of more practical approaches. So there's another 100,000 words of SIAM goodness coming your way soon. That'll be available end of November, and the associated training and certification is in development, and that's going to be available 1st of February next year. What I'm going to do, if it's okay with people, is skip forward, talk briefly about Verism, and then we'll kind of wrap up and have questions, and then we can carry on after the end of the session as well. Those are my contact details. If you've got any questions after the session, use them. You know, if you want to have a chat, drop me an email. I'll give you my phone number. We can talk, chat to me on Twitter, connect with me on LinkedIn. It's always kind of good to kind of expand the SIAM network. And just showing my appalling planning, I've got about 3 more exercises I was going to give you, but we've got no time to do those. So for those of you that are watching the webinar, and for yourselves as well, maybe some to kind of take away and think about when you look at these slides. So challenges of introducing SIAM in a more mature organisation where you've already got contracts in place, you've already got service providers in place. The SIAM Professional content is actually going to answer quite a lot of those, but that's maybe one to think about. And if, Michael, you're going to start having meetings of a SIAM group, some food for thought there. Skills for service integration. So huge challenges being the service integrator, because if you're external, you don't own the contractual relationships with the service providers, but you are acting on behalf of the customer. So kind of what skills are important there, what sort of people do you need, you know, things like negotiation, conflict resolution, what can you put in place behind that to back them up as well?
Can I ask one question?
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Oh.
Seamless.
I'll just throw it away. Do you have any, not necessarily practical experience, but do you know of any success stories with using an external SIAM service provider?
Yeah.
And because, I mean, I recently concluded a contract where we had this set up with the external SIAM. Mm-hmm. And one of the main concerns we actually had when designing the contract was just the credibility of the external provider actually you know, trying to enforce contracts that they weren't party to on behalf of someone else. Yeah. And that was actually a main concern we have. Did you just have any, just 1 minute or 2 minutes, any thoughts about that, how it has worked in practice?
Absolutely. And it is, when we were doing the professional discussions, one of the trends that some of the, certainly the UK people had seen, was a real trend to kind of bring service integration back in-house. But having said that, companies like Atos, this is their bread and butter, and they are doing it. And the example that I mentioned when I presented at the ITSMF conference was Atos is the service integrator for the Olympic Games, and they have been recommissioned for numerous Olympic Games to manage all the providers who are involved with the IT, the data, the results information. So that, I think, is a very successful example. But if you drop me an email, I can put you in touch with the lady from Atos who was part of the group, the one who's worked on kind of 40+ engagements. She's working with, yeah, I'm sure I can. I don't think it's confidential. She's working with the Metropolitan Police at the moment, doing their service integration, but she'd be able to share lots of with you as well.
Okay. Yeah.
Because also from the conference I mentioned last couple of days, we had a presentation of a case story. So we have some examples also in the Nordic countries, where and the case story was on Outokumpu, which is located in Finland and is one of the world's largest steel companies. So if you're interested, I can get you the presentation and details. from the conference.
Yeah, that was a really interesting presentation, and one of the things that I found particularly fascinating was Sammy was talking about culture difference across the service providers, and he talked about the fact that they had Nordic service providers, European service providers, and English service providers. Kind of thing. We're not European anymore, are we? Another thing I was going to ask you to think about was how do you encourage cooperation and collaboration? So we have touched on this a little bit. There's some information in the foundation body of knowledge where we cover things like collaboration agreements, but this is one where I think there probably is a very specific cultural element, because how we build team spirit in the UK might be very different to how you do things in Denmark. So that's one to think about as well. So, anybody seen anything about Verism? Oh, that's pretty impressive. So, last year I was working on the SIAM Foundation body of knowledge. This year I started working on SIAM Professional, and the SIAM Foundation team all wanted to come back and work on Professional, but we also had a lot more people who wanted to be involved as well. So we had a team of 50 people working on SIAM Professional. So that was my plan for this year, and that would have kept me reasonably busy. But then an organisation called the IFDC, the International Foundation for Digital Competencies, came to me and said, we're thinking about reworking service management in response to all these challenges that organisations have. Would you like to do that? And I went, yeah, all right, sounds quite interesting. Could fix quite a few of the things that I've been grumbling about for years. And I said, when do you need it by? And they said 1st of October. And I went, right, okay. So I put some trusted associates, took over the management of SIAM Professional for me. And for the last kind of 3.5 months, I've been head down working on this new approach to service management, which we've called Verism. And I'm going to give you a really brief introduction now, just because it's quite interesting. So Verism is a new approach to service management. It's not a massive in-depth framework that's going to tell you must do this, this, and this, but it's talking about how do we need to start thinking about service management in response to the fact that we are being overwhelmed by new frameworks, new methods, new things coming out every week, technology's changing constantly. How do we respond to that? And Verism is actually an acronym for value-driven, evolving, responsive, integrated service management, but it's also a word which is an artistic style which is focused on realism and portraying the world as it is, because sometimes I think when we develop management practices, ways of working, we can be quite idealistic. Wouldn't it be lovely if this happened? So we decided to focus on the real world, and one of the definitions that we saw was warts and all, which we kind of liked because that's how we work. So one of the drivers for Verism is digital transformation, and the main point is that IT technology is no longer the preserve of the IT department. It's embedded in every single part of the organisation, every single business process. And that's creating new challenges. As organisations, we need to be thinking about the business impact. We need to think about user experience. We need to be more entrepreneurial as organisations. So digital transformation is creating new challenges for service management professionals and for organisations. And one of the groups, I think it was this group here, I heard mention shadow IT.
Yes.
See, I was listening. I thought, I wonder what the Danish for shadow IT is, and apparently it's shadow IT, so there you go. But shadow IT is becoming a thing because the business is pushing the technology conversation now, and if the IT department isn't providing, they'll go do it themselves. So we need to start to think about technology at the business level. How is it transforming business processes? And then the other side of it is, this is our world as service management professionals. We're being asked about robotic process automation and machine learning and artificial intelligence and SIAM and DevOps and DevSecOps and rugged DevOps and lean and all these things. It's getting a bit messy. And I know certainly in my experience what I've seen is organisations chasing one perfect thing after another. So, you know, they spent years trying to get ITIL absolutely perfect, but then suddenly DevOps comes along and now they're restructuring and they're creating DevOps engineer roles and they're chasing this DevOps dream instead. So we need to find a way to make sense of this as well and actually focus on the business outcome rather than trying to create something perfect, some perfect way of working. So the IFDC is the organisation behind this, so the website ifdc.global if you want to read a little bit more. And this is the Verism model. So this is kind of what underpins the thinking that we did. So again with Verism, big group of international authors, real mix of age, gender, nationality, and we tried to kind of define a service management approach that would allow organisations to be responsive and to be flexible and to take advantage of all these new things. So the first thing we said is governance is absolutely key for this. What are we as an organisation trying to achieve and what are we putting in place to do that? So governance underpins everything, it wraps around everything, but then we said from our governance, let's define some service management principles, but let's not do this in the IT department, let's do this as an organisation. And our service management principles will tell us what level of quality do we want? You know, do we value speed more than something that works perfectly? What level of risk are we comfortable with in order to get a new product or service to market? How do we feel about spending money? Are we quite cautious? So the service management principles then translate for the rest of the organisation how we want to deliver. You know, security is a good example because security quite often is seen as an IT thing, information security, but in fact you can collect data from your customers and you can write it down on a piece of paper. You can talk to them on the phone, they can give you information. So these service management principles, how we are behaving, need to be set at the organisational level. But then within that, what you do is give your product and service teams freedom to use whatever technology, management practices they want, as long as it's within those service management principles. So this management mesh here that wraps around our delivery life cycle can be made up of DevOps, ITIL, SIAMs in there. We can put the emerging technologies in there, we can put the artificial intelligence, we can put the machine learning if it's relevant. And we can look at that management mesh each time we work on a new product or service and decide if we need to change, decide if we need to adapt. The last presentation at the ITSMF conference was Carsten Beck from the, what's his institute called?
It's Copenhagen Institute for Future something.
Yes, the
Future Research.
Yeah.
Future Research Institute.
The Copenhagen Institute for Future something. But he was talking about the future of service management, and he was talking about the fact that service management is going to have to be more integrated, more responsive, and this is what we're trying to do with Verism. So we're not saying, here's Verism, throw away everything that you've got and start working in a new way. What we're saying is if you can get your service management principles right, you are then free to use SIAM, to use ITIL, to use DevOps, to be agile, to be lean, whatever you want to do, you can build something that's responsive and flexible. So at the moment, that was my last slide. So at the moment, there is a webinar available which is on verism.global, where you can learn a little bit more about this. And there is going to be a book. So the book's been written, the book's being copy edited at the moment. That's going to be available early December. And then next year, that content's going to grow out and there will be kind of training and certification as well. The kind of thing as well that I would emphasize, particularly about the IFDC, they've got a real strong community focus and we want to grow Verism from the community and with the community. So getting people's feedback, getting people's input, working with organisations like we're talking to Microsoft at the moment, we're talking to a lot of the industry bodies, IT for IT, ITSMF International we're working with as well. So we really want to be this to be something that comes from the community. Yes, do you have a question?
Is that another time to the e-competency framework and all that? Sorry. Is this IFDC in any way attached to or working with the group behind the e-competency framework?
You might be able to answer that better than me, Claudia. I'm not sure who's behind ECF.
I don't think so. IFDC is a non-profit organization that has been been made because we need to make this owned by a non-profit organization, so it doesn't get exploited. Yeah.
Yeah, we do have a case study in the Verizon book which is based around how an organisation used ECF to define its capabilities, and also Sophia Skills Framework for the Information Age. I think they're going to come and talk to us at Professional as well. But certainly the things that already exist, we've tried to kind of link in. And again, I think, you know, maybe a conversation with ITAMOG, because if there's specialist areas, they become part of your capabilities, and I think it's important to build those relationships. So, awful. It's gone so quickly. Did we have any other questions from the webinar side of things? Okay, so questions now, SIAM questions, Verizon questions. I did clearly think we were going to have about 8 more hours than we actually did, but, you know, I'm happy to chat afterwards as well. Casper.
One of the things I've been missing all along in these various structures is distinguishing between whether the SIAM function internally in the organization is within the IT department or in the business outside of the traditional IT department. I think that's the 5th structure or archetype that's missing in your model. I don't know if you probably got some sort of a retort, but I think that's missing.
Yeah, I think it's always very tempting to think about SIAM as being an IT thing because that's generally where it's applied. But we did have examples from the professional group of where SIAM is being used for non-IT services. So the example that I gave was a local council that's using it to manage all the suppliers that, you know, cut the grass for it and look after its trees and its fences and its parks. They're using a SIAM approach there. So for me, I think SIAM, the service integration element needs to sit at a business level. Be conscious of the fact that quite often a lot of the service providers are providing technical services, but I think there is a danger that if it sits at a very technical level, we lose that kind of big business picture. It was interesting in the Sofigate case study, there was a service integrator that then interface with service managers who then interface with the business, and I've not seen that before.
No one could argue that they actually were part or should have been part of the SI team. That's the way they constructed in that case.
Yeah. But again, you know, every SIAM model is different, and that was one of the things where we had to be quite careful, particularly with the foundation level material, because a lot of the organisations that were part of the group gave me these unbelievably detailed process models. You know, every single ITIL process, all the project management processes were on there. Some of them were in the customer box, some of them were in the service integrator box. But then we had a lot of debate within the group because everyone's different. You know, there were some of them said, well, the customer always does contract management. And then another organisation said, well, actually, we've had contract management given to us as a service integrator. So we, in the end, deliberately didn't put these very complex models into the foundation body of knowledge, because if you do, people just pick that up and they use it as if it's the kind of the only way of working. So I think for each organisation, there's a lot of questions you need to ask to get to your appropriate SIAM model and put the function in the right place.
We actually had that discussion during Lisa's presentation.
Yeah.
Where we said, well, adopt and adapt adopted. It still applies also in SIAM. We said that for years for ITIL.
Yeah, and it's kind of tempting, I think, to wish that somebody could give you a SIAM model on a page, you know, and say just do this, everything will be fine. But again, it comes back to us as service management professionals or IT professionals that we have to kind of look at the guidance that's available and then apply it for our organisation, and that's where it's always going to be a challenge. Any other questions?
Are you planning on doing more visualization of what SIAM is? Because I now read all the material, and I actually took the SIAM Foundation course as well.
Yep.
You have these lovely models about defining different SIAM structures. I'm kind of missing a one picture overview of what is SIAM about, right? Getting all these concepts and different structures in a one-pager.
That's something we could look at. With my training business, we've certainly done that for ITIL, which was a real challenge, and I think we've done COBIT on a page as well. So yeah, we'll have a think about that.
I've done one. I'm not sure it's very good, but I've put everything into one Visio mind map sort of structure.
Yeah.
Send it to you.
Yeah, I would like that.
Yeah. That'd be lovely. Yeah. Save me a job.
Maybe we can include it.
We can include it.
Yes.
Any other questions?
No.
Awesome. Well.
One thing.
Yeah.
So everybody, I assume you have a telephone, right? Phone, smartphone. Would you please evaluate this meeting now? So doing that, going to the Dansk IT, you know, DIT.dk/EVA, which stands for evaluating. You press the picture and you can evaluate. So let's just reserve 1 minute for an evaluation. It's both good for us and always good to get feedback. I hope you agree.
Yep.
And while you do that, I'll say thank you for today and thank you to Claire very much. We have a new open network meeting the 27th of November. Please register and spread the word. We hope to have it up and running next year. Yeah, to support SIAM. And also regarding, we're talking about frameworks, the 4th of December we have a debate regarding the different frameworks and yeah, how confusing it is and what to choose, which, when and where.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The last question is coming, so you should all attend.
Yeah, last question is coming. Yeah, there is a few flyers regarding the network here and also about what we're doing in the near future, so you can take it with you home. Yeah, well, thank you for today, everyone, and thank you for participating. Do you have something to say, Fabian?
Does anyone have some issues with the?
I can only find the one for the 27th of November, not this one for today. When I go to the page.
Press the picture. Next one, you go one back.
So
technology is wonderful.
DIT.dk/EVA.
I did what you did.
Yeah, just give a big round of applause.